West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
For the Republican Party that has pushed for judges who oppose Roe v. Wade, while many also still claim in confirmation hearings under oath that they have some kind of open mind. Well, this is about power. It's about installing judges who are likely against Roe, regardless of what they say, who are likely against women's rights on the courts. And Donald Trump's luck of the draw, combined with Mitch McConnell's unprecedented obstruction, led to Donald Trump, in one term, picking 3 justices. Meanwhile, nationally, the Congress is led by a woman speaker. And this current Congress has more women than ever before. It's a complex story when you look at power and gender, but down at the state level, many of these legislatures, which have been passing the rules I'm telling you about, they're run by Republican parties whose elected representatives are overwhelmingly men. The Mississippi law that the Supreme Court will review tomorrow, well, it passed with 89% of its support in the legislature from men. And by the way, in total, women are only about 15% of that state's lawmakers. The Alabama Senate recently passed an abortion ban with no exception for either rape or incest. It passed with 100% of its supporters in the legislature from the male column. Every single person that voted for that new restrictive rule was a man. Only 4 of the total 35 state senators are women there, actually. In Texas, as I mentioned earlier, men have outnumbered women in that legislature 30-1 over 200 years. An incredibly lopsided figure. So these are power dynamics that matter and gender inequities that matter, and as many of the experts and evidence show, are then carried out in ways that affect one gender more than the other. 3 other states right now are planning to copy most of the Texas scheme. We expect that to happen very quickly if the Supreme Court greenlights it. And you should note, when you look at them, each state legislature that is talking about doing that on the conservative side, dominated by male lawmakers. In Arkansas, men outnumber women 3-1. In Florida, women are just a third of the lawmakers. Over in South Carolina, also talking about copying Texas, women are only 17% of the legislature. In South Dakota, women are only 28% of the lawmakers. The numbers are overwhelming. You can see them there, and they show who is making decisions for whom. This is an imbalance that technically the Supreme Court isn't really going to get into in tomorrow's hearings. It's something that is real, that everyone can see, that's happening in our politics and in power, but something that the courts, at least when it comes to pro-choice laws, seem to just not even want to acknowledge. Now, it's something that Texas State Senator Wendy Davis acknowledged. She led that filibuster against a different anti-abortion law and has discussed the power imbalance.
So many of these laws are written by men. They'll never suffer the consequences of their own actions. And women confront very sad realities. These bastards that are in office who are passing these laws deserve to be voted out.
Davis, one of the lawmakers fighting to try to change this initially from the inside and clearly outnumbered. This is broader than a philosophical discussion about when one defines life. This is, right now, about breaking constitutional Supreme Court precedent, despite people saying we live under the rule of law. It's about using powers to attack women's rights and choices. And a powerful group basically passing laws against another group, working against what is about half the population of the country. I mentioned Rachel briefly earlier in the program. Here's a little more of what Rachel Maddow said about tomorrow's court case.
We know what the purpose of this case is, and we know why Republicans picked the particular justices they picked to be on the Supreme Court. So it is, frankly, a matter now of preparing for a return to American women having to seek out illegal abortions instead of having the right to get one. We don't exactly know when the court will rule, but there are pretty grave expectations for what that ruling will mean.
Where that ruling is headed and what it means begins formally before the Supreme Court tomorrow. Mississippi Republicans have lawyers who are prepared to argue tomorrow that the Supreme Court should not only uphold its ban, but also flat out end Roe v. Wade. Do it. Admit it. An explicit effort to end that 50-year precedent. In formal filings, they argue that Roe is, quote, egregiously wrong. Now, the justices could reject that, or could find Mississippi's ban violated Roe's right to choice by limiting it so early. Just as litigation over the Texas ban that I mentioned turns on whether that state's bounty scheme basically gives veto power over one woman's abortion to other citizens. That's how Justice Breyer put it in an earlier review over whether to initially halt the law. What else could happen? The court could uphold the ban while claiming it is not overruling Roe in its entirety. I mention that because that has been a kind of misleading rearguard legal attack on choice that many conservative legal leaders, have been using for some time. The court could also strike down this ban and just keep Roe v. Wade as law of the land. The administration running the DOJ decides the formal U.S. position in these kind of cases. We've had Neil Katyal on this and many other MSNBC programs. He was the person who did that in court for Obama as Solicitor General. And the Solicitor General reports up to the Attorney General. The new Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has been leading the opposition to these southern state bans and accuses them of simply defying, denying, and abrogating women's constitutional rights.
The obvious and expressly acknowledged intention of this statutory scheme is to prevent women from exercising their constitutional rights.
That is just legally true. That's not a debate. The Supreme Court has long ruled these are constitutional rights. In fact, few members of the court will openly say that they will just ignore precedent or reverse that. In fact, you may recall this from all the Supreme Court confirmation hearings, which get covered on TV and discussed around the country. It has become kind of a weird Baroque tradition for the even Republican appointees to say under oath all sorts of words about Roe being a type of settled precedent.
I understand the importance of the precedent set forth in Roe v. Wade.
I don't think that abortion or the right to abortion would change.
Do you think some of the restrictions might change?
I think some of the restrictions would change.
The Supreme Court of the United States has held in Roe versus Wade that a fetus is not a person. That's the law of the land. I accept the law of the land.
That is the law of the land. All of that was recent. Much of it was under oath. And that's one reason why these conservative lawyers are trying to lob these pretty far-fetched legal arguments for the court to, and you know I try to keep it real with you, to overturn Roe without overturning Roe, which just means overturning Roe without admitting it, which is the kind of sleight of hand that we are accustomed to in politics, but the Supreme Court is supposed to be above, and its members certainly claim they are. As for accepting the law of the land, unlike other rapidly shifting and divisive social debates, the public also accepts this as the law too. Most Americans consistently believe abortion should be legal in most cases. Now, there are still earnest and validly held religious and personal objections to abortion. Anyone familiar with religious traditions knows about that. So how can both those things be true? Well, the data shows most Americans do not think that even those earnestly held concerns should then be enforced by the government, any more than most religious people demanding that the government enforce the Sabbath. That's just not a common view. America was founded with a separation of religion and state. We are not a theocracy. So, where do we all go from here? Well, some legal experts think, as Rachel said, that it is now a matter of when the court goes forward supporting these abortion bans, not if. We don't know. We will follow the case and see where it lands. But if that is true, then the choice movement will have to focus less on the courts, where precedents change over several decades, and probably focus more on the ballot box, where these laws are being drafted in the first place. Women are still half the nation, and pro-women's movements have been sparked by everything from the original calls for suffrage to Donald Trump's election by a male-dominated electoral plurality, not a majority, by the way, while Democratic women and women of color were crucial to the recent and record voter turnout in Georgia, which flipped 2 red Senate seats blue and also demoted Mitch McConnell, ending his sway over Supreme Court nominations. And by the way, a lot of that Georgia mobilizing was led by a rising woman in Southern politics, Stacey Abrams. Meanwhile, other elected women have continued to use their power not only to push reform and new laws, but to recount some personal stories in the Congress about abortions and women's rights and present this in public to their colleagues, to the voters, to try to make sure the reality for women is told by women and presented to everyone, in this case by women in a position of power. Now, against the reality of these very high stakes for women, there is also a new and churlish refrain you may have heard from the anti-vaccine right that tries to troll and mock these long-standing and heartfelt issues opposing vaccines by saying, "My body, my choice." Now, like so much of trolling on the right, it's a deliberately hypocritical bit of political theater. And yet, as policy, it also inadvertently reinforces the very gender discrimination at play that these groups are warning about and urging the Supreme Court to fight against. Because, again, I'm just going to try to tell it to you in reality, in plain English. In the vaccine fight, there aren't any states using government power to legally ban the choice to decline a vaccine in your body. Now, there are rules that might keep you out of a restaurant or a workplace, but it is most certainly your legal choice, man or woman, over your body to put a vaccine in it. But in Mississippi and Texas and this growing list of states, let's be clear. The men in power, I showed you, as overwhelmingly men, are already making it the opposite for women. The internal functioning of their bodies and medical choices is legally banned by the men in power. And if the Supreme Court continues to greenlight that against 50 years of precedent, the next revolution may come, if at all, at the ballot box in deciding who should be making these choices about freedom for other people.
It is Wednesday, the 1st of December of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Oh, will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests, those ones that are heading to the Supreme Court to talk about the sanctity of life? My gosh. And I'm not relegating these priests to just the Catholic spectrum, which is kind of odd because Catholic means pretty much universal. But yeah, we're going to include pretty much Southern male evangelical types. White. For the most part. Yes, isn't it odd? Isn't it odd that all these laws telling women what they can do or cannot do are pretty much being written, passed, and enforced by men? I suppose they would say as God intended. Yeah. Since you're the one that started painting God as a guy, I guess we'll have to listen to you. And I'm a guy. Man. You know, when I was a kid, I always thought it was weird. I mean, God is God. God has no gender. God has no human form. What are you talking about? Yes, we created God in our image. Indeed, we did. It's not the other way around. But, when you're going to predicate all of your laws, your way of living upon a fantasy, something made up because you don't know how to put order to the world, and so how you put order to the world is to make things up? Wow, that's human nature now, isn't it? I know. They're still searching for the God gene. And they may find it right there with cold fusion. Yeah, tabletop cold fusion. Remember that? Where are we going? I'll tell you where we're going. We got court cases up the Yahoo. And as Ari pointed out at the top there during his segment, or was pointed out during our Ari's show at the top, is that we are now going to find out whether the 3 Federalist Society judges on the Supreme Court, justices, lied under oath. And there's nothing we can do about it. Not one damn thing. And I'll tell you why. Because they're not liberal Democrats, a woman or of color. Then, oh my God, they'd be yanking them off the bench right now, hog-tying them, and they wouldn't even frog march them. They'd drag them right down the Supreme Court steps into the waiting vans, spirited away to a destination to be divulged later. Because that's how it's working. And everybody goes, wow, we got to be careful. You know, the Nazis are trying to take over. Trying? I think they pretty much already have. If we're at the point where the population is storming the Capitol to interrupt the peaceful transition of power, I think that by the time you're there, the Nazis are pretty much entrenched. And think about it. Try to find a police force anywhere where there's not some cop, probably even in leadership, that doesn't harbor this authoritarian mindset that would pretty much, they'd be goose-stepping out in public instead of, in private like they do now. Try to find one police department anywhere in America where that's not the case. And then let's talk about the military. Right after the January 6th insurrection, what did some of these fools do? Wow, man. I'm going to join the military so I can take over the government better. I'll be able to learn all the tricks of the trade. And yet, think about it. For the most part, it was our military leadership that prevented us from going too far down the path. But there will be laws preventing that too. Oh, military leadership? See, actually, it's pretty scary when the military is stepping in to be, the arbiters of democracy. That's what the founders did not want to have happen with a standing military. Okay. But thankfully, the constitutional adherents populated the leadership in the military. And, not counting Flynn, obviously. He's a traitor. I don't know why Flynn reminds me of Dr. Oz. Probably because they're both working for Turkey. Did you know that Oz holds dual citizenship? But that's okay. That's okay. I think that, did Ron Lantos hold dual citizenship as well? I don't think so. But he was pretty much lobbying for Turkey and Hungary, which is kind of odd because they were kind of at odds with each other, but there it is. Anyway, Flynn's a traitor. Lantos never hid what he did, but Mike Flynn does. And I don't think that he liked that the black president told him what to do. There's a lot of those types in the military, obviously. So I'm still curious. Oh, that's right. Trump pardoned Flynn, so I guess nothing can be done about any of his crimes now. Because as more and more of these revelations come out, I'm still curious on why he is not in a brig. But we'll find out. They can go a couple of ways with Merrick Garland now. I get a little perturbed when he gets taken to task because the function of a true law enforcement agency is not to talk about their investigations to everybody. Primarily because they don't want to tip off the perps. Usually. It was only the previous guy's Justice Department where they went out daily and gloated about what they were doing. Because they were truly going on witch hunts. Everything that they accused others of doing, they were doing. This administration actually wants to adhere to the letter of the law and procedure, but we have to be careful with that now, don't we? Because if there's one thing that the Nazis are experts at, it's using our laws against us. They did it in Nazi Germany. Oh, they did it in the Weimar Republic. Or is it the Weimar? And now they're doing it here. It's not as if the last time they did it was in Germany. But now they're doing it here. Or have been doing it here. So they already have some great experience on how to do it. We're already seeing, this is how far entrenched the Nazis are in America. We're already seeing the Night of the Long Knives play out. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert going after Mace and others within the Republican Party, or should I say the Nazi Party, for not being sufficiently Nazi enough, or might be too popular, and, that's one of the things the Nazis do. They look around, they go, who might advance above me, and I'm going to have them dead. That was the Night of the Long Knives. It wasn't going out just to kill the commie professors. It was also to kill Nazi supporters that might, be getting a little too up. Whatever that is. So now we're seeing the Night of the Long Knives play out, and that's just indicative of how far the takeover has gone. How do we stop it? Some people say we can do it by voting. And that's the way I'd like to do it. But, as we see, there are no laws preventing foreign interference in our elections. Thank you, Mitch McConnell, and the rest of the Nazi Republican Party. They want to have as much disruption and chaos as possible because that's how they hold on to power. They can point to themselves and say, only we can rein this in. They are protecting a murderer by the name of Donald J. Trump. The guy had COVID, debated with Joe, refused to wear a mask, refused to get tested before the debate because he knew that he had COVID. We all talked about it at the time. It's odd to hear the speculation now as if it's something new. Was Trump trying to give Joe COVID? Yes, damn right he was. That's exactly what we said then. How'd we know he had COVID? We didn't. But all the behaviors sure pointed at it. I'm not going to get tested. I'm Donald J. Trump, the leader of the free world and all of creation. And so then they put it on the honor system. I got to tell you, there's no honor among thieves. And yet they put it on the honor system. And then, not only that, he visited up close and personal with Gold Star families and then blamed them for giving him COVID. The Nazi Republican Party is protecting that. The Republican Nazi Party is working hard to bring that back. Yep, they've gamed the system. Are we going to follow the letter of the law? Are we going to follow procedure? There is a procedure in which to fight this. And one is just setting your foot down and saying, no more Nazis in government. You do not have a First Amendment right to spout that BS. Sitting electeds, threatening the lives of other sitting electeds, the law applies to everybody. All right? Well, we do have a curated show, of course. I need not go off too long now. I've gone on long enough. Yes, I have. It's Wednesday. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the curated part of the show so that we can move the show along. How about that? Well, on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. I love Eggs Benedict. Well, Senate Republicans blocked the must-pass defense bill after demanding its quick passage. That's what they do. A California court will determine if a law requiring women on boards of publicly traded companies is legal. They're trying to get women out. They just got a little too uppity. Gave them the vote. Now look, they got to sit on boards too. They're going to adjudicate the only law in America right now that has increased the possibility of women sitting on boards of publicly traded companies. Well, we know where that's going. And a federal appeals court has ordered the release of some redacted passages from the Mueller Report. It's about time. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Polish women protested attempts to further restrict abortion. And German prosecutors are investigating tax evasion by tax advisors. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, right by the social media scroll. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help us. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send the funds from that to us once a month, it really does help us because the bills continue to increase. In fact, I should give a heads up. We may have to move from Spreaker for our podcasting. Getting priced out, and they're not allowing us to have as many of the services that we paid for. Yeah. Well, so much for that. So we're looking into Libsyn, but we'll give you a heads up ahead of time before we make that jump, and looking at ways to archive the years and years, 10 years of podcasts from all of our various shows, and so that people can still access them. So we're looking into that, but of course, everything costs money, and even though the bulk of what we do here comes out of our own wallets, we are still unable to do it without you. So if you could send us those funds of like an espresso-type coffee drink of what you might spend on such to us once a month, we're able to put that into the kitty and pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America by enemies foreign and domestic. And we take it seriously, all kidding aside. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary, incidentally, on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on Twitter and those other social media platforms. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of so far Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Yeah, Libsyn doesn't have as much of the bells and whistles and whatnot. So I think that's why initially we went with Spreaker, is because they had a player and the interface looked fun to work with, and they had good graphics. But hey, I guess all that costs money, and they keep increasing the costs, and they just they're pricing us out. Is essentially what it gets down to. Have to make a business decision, and I hate that. Okay, enough of that rigmarole. Let's, I have not brought this up out of tabs yet. Let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. This first offering is out of the American Independent by Josh Israel. Senate Republicans voted last night, Monday, to stall action on a must-pass defense bill after weeks of demanding its immediate passage. 45 Senate Republicans joined 5 Democrats and 1 independent in voting against cloture on the National Defense Authorization Act, an annual bill that establishes funding levels and policies for the Department of Defense and other agencies involved in national defense. With just 45 senators voting in favor of cloture, the Democratic majority fell short of the 60 votes needed to end debate and advance the package. Senate Minority Leader McConnell, who opposed cloture, said he wanted to ensure real debate and a real amendment process. This guy. He and his caucus hope that by stalling the bill's passage, they can force a series of votes on controversial amendments, including a proposal to overturn President Joe Biden's policies regarding an oil pipeline between Russia and Germany. While Congress often deadlocks on most other pieces of legislation, the annual defense bill has long been an exception. Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe, the top Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, noted in a committee press release on September 22nd that the bill has been enacted every year for the last 60 years in a row. The bill is the most important bill we do each year, but the current crises we face make it more essential now, Inhofe said. It's up to Congress to ensure that our troops and their families have the tools, capabilities, training, and resources needed to defend our country from these very real, very serious threats. Well, the GOP caucus is now refusing to let the bill move forward after spending weeks complaining that the Democratic majority was doing that very thing. It's irresponsible for Senator Schumer to leave the floor consideration of the NDAA to the last minute, complained Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer on October 19th. As the majority leader, Senator Schumer has all the power to bring this bill up. Consideration of NDAA should be the Senate's top priority before breaking for the Veterans Day work period. For the past 60 years, Senate majorities have done the job and passed the National Defense Authorization Act on a bipartisan vote, McConnell complained on November 2nd. But this year's Democratic majority is sleepwalking toward yet another preventable problem. The Democratic leader has left NDAA trapped in limbo. Despite these statements of urgency, all of the Republicans opposed actually moving forward with the bill when given the chance to vote for it. With the end of the year rapidly approaching, this delay will force the Senate to spend even more time on the defense bill, imperiling passage of urgent legislation to avoid a government shutdown and to avert a catastrophic default on the national debt. It also keeps the Senate focused on something other than the enactment of Biden's popular $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Jobs bill, which Majority Leader Chuck Schumer hopes to pass by the end of December. And this is but the latest example of McConnell and his caucus using obstructive tactics to try to run out the clock on Biden's legislative agenda. Of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. When then California Governor Jerry Brown signed the nation's first law requiring women on boards of publicly traded companies, he suggested it might not survive legal challenges. 3 years later, a judge will begin hearing evidence today in Los Angeles Superior Court that could undo the law, credited with giving more women seats in boardrooms traditionally dominated by men. The California law has spurred other states to adopt or consider similar laws. The conservative legal group Judicial Watch brought the lawsuit claiming it is illegal to use taxpayer funds to enforce a law that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution by mandating a gender-based quota. Yeah. Okay. They are creating a classification that either prefers or discriminates against one class or in preference of another. Attorney Robert Patrick Schitt said, his name is Stitched. He said the state does not have a compelling government interest to create the mandate. Really? No women on any boards. And that's and getting women on boards is apparently not a, what does it call it? Compelling government interest? I thought that was exactly what representative democracy was compelled to do. Oh, I forget. These Nazis don't believe in representative democracy. Another conservative legal group has filed a separate lawsuit in federal court claiming the law violates the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Former Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, who authored the legislation, said the bill did not impose a quota because boards don't need a certain percentage of women. Corporations can meet the requirement by adding women without undermining the rights of male board members. She said The plaintiffs should be embarrassed for claiming the law is discriminatory. I find it to be incredibly ironic and hypocritical, Jackson said. Anytime you try to make significant change to the status quo, the powers that have been institutionalized to this kind of discrimination are likely to fight back. The law required publicly traded companies headquartered in California to have one member who identifies as a woman on their board of directors by the end of 2019. By January, boards with 5 directors must have 2 women, and boards with 6 or more must have 3. Penalties range from $100,000 fines for companies that fail to report board compositions to the California Secretary of State's office, companies that do not include the required number of female board members can be fined $100,000 for first violations and $300,000 for subsequent violations. Fewer than half of the nearly 650 applicable corporations in the state reported last year that they had complied. More than half didn't file the required disclosure statement according to the most recent report. No companies have been fined, though the Secretary of State can do so. The state had argued in court papers that it hasn't used taxpayer funds to enforce the law. Dresner and the state attorney general's office declined to comment on pending litigation. Supporters of the law said it already had a big impact on California and beyond. Washington state passed a similar measure this year, and lawmakers in other states, including Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Hawaii, have proposed similar bills. Illinois requires publicly traded companies to report the makeup of their boards. Several European countries, including France, Germany, Norway, and Spain, require corporate boards to include women. And before the California law went into effect, women held 17% of the seats on company boards in the state. And that was based on the Russell 3000 index of the largest companies in the U.S., according to the advocacy group 50/50 Women on Boards. As of September, the percentage of board seats held by women climbed to more than 30% in California, compared to 26% nationally. Still, some 40% of the largest companies in California need to add women to their boards to comply with the law. Tucker of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A federal appeals court yesterday, Tuesday, directed the Justice Department to disclose certain redacted passages from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation report that relate to individuals who were investigated by prosecutors but not ultimately charged. The ruling came in a public records complaint from the news organization BuzzFeed, which sued for an unredacted version of Mueller's report examining Russian election interference and possible ties to Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Though the 3-judge panel said a lower court judge was correct in ruling that certain portions of the report should remain redacted, it said in its opinion that other passages that BuzzFeed sought or fought to see can be disclosed because they involve facts available elsewhere in the report and do not contain new facts or stigmatizing material. In particular, The appeals court said the Justice Department must disclose redacted information about the Mueller team's decision to not prosecute an unnamed person whom BuzzFeed contends is likely Donald Trump Jr., Trump's oldest son, for potential campaign finance violations. The Mueller Report detailed how prosecutors, looking at potential campaign finance crimes, investigated a 2016 Trump Tower meeting at which Jr. expected to receive pejorative information about his father's Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton from a Russian lawyer. Ultimately, prosecutors decided against any charges related to that meeting. The redacted passages contain no new facts. They contain no new information or deception or descriptions of conduct that have not been made public elsewhere in this very report. The privacy interests, then, are not robust, as no additional reputational or stigmatizing harm can result from the disclosure of the information contained therein, said the opinion from Judge Karen LaCraft Henderson. Other requested information can remain redacted, she said, because it contains additional facts about individuals that are not disclosed or even intimated elsewhere in the report. In a statement, BuzzFeed News Editor-in-Chief Mark Schoof said it enthusiastically applauds and welcomes the unanimous ruling from the 3 federal judges, the result of months of dedicated, relentless legal work and investigative journalism to ensure that the workings of our government are transparent and readily accessible to the public. Now, we all remember that Mueller's 448-page report identified extensive contacts between Russians and Trump and his associates, but ultimately found insufficient evidence to charge a criminal conspiracy to sway the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Though investigators found multiple instances in which Trump sought to seize control of the Russia investigation, they did not reach a conclusion as to whether he had illegally obstructed justice. That's why Trump was impeached. We all remember that. Twice. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The Anglo-Saxon era lasted until 1066, but its legacy can be seen in British and American law today. Anglo-Saxon kings simply proclaimed the law, although they had to accommodate regional customs. There was no popular sovereignty or rule by the people as we know it today. There were also no human rights as we understand them today. Anglo-Saxon law is called customary law because it evolved from the customs of the people. This is different from common law, which comes from both custom and the decisions of judges. However, principles of common law can be traced back to the customary law of the Anglo-Saxon period. The common law survived to an extent in the United States, where it was adopted and modified by the colonies and later by the states. Finally, Anglo-Saxon law followed the principle of arguing a case before a judge who was appointed by the king, although in the Anglo-Saxon era, there were no lawyers. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day the Anaconda Copper Company instituted its rustling card system at its mines in Butte, Montana. The company used the rustling cards in two ways. First, as a work permit, and then as a way to keep track of miners. A miner looking for work would first have to apply for a card. Miners had to present information about citizenship status, English literacy skills, work history, and 2 years of employer references. Once the card was approved, the miners would then be allowed to apply for work. The Butte Miners Union charged that it was the company's way of blacklisting those who had quit, been fired, or known as union militants. By 1917, the Metal Mine Workers Union and the IWW added that the company was looking to nip agitation in the bud. They alleged employers were holding on to cards or denying them altogether for no reason. According to historian Paul Brissenden, both unions maintained the company was looking to, quote, punish those who were at one time active in the socialist administration of Butte Mayor Lewis J. Duncan, to prevent the Socialist Party from again securing a foothold in Butte, to strengthen the hands of the more conservative unions, and to curb the industrial unionism of the IWW and Metal Mine Workers Union. The company asserted its right to keep out its enemies out of the mines, alleging they presented a danger to mine safety. But the unions shot back, stating the blacklist meant the hiring of untrained, inexperienced workers who presented the real danger. Brissenden notes that many union radicals continued to work in the mines despite the card system. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 61. Oh my. Cloudy early with peaks of sunshine expected late. Winds light and variable. Clear to partly cloudy overnight with lows in the low 40s. Winds remaining light and variable. And then some sunshine along with some cloudy intervals tomorrow. Highs in the mid-50s. Winds light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County continue to rise. We now stand at 248,080 people. That's right, 248,080 people with 360 deceased, and that's 10 more than what we had. Oh my gosh. All right, pollen is rated as none outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Visibility is down to 1.5 mile. Barometric pressure is at barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.25 inches, and relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 44 and partly cloudy. Paris is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy. Rome is 55 and mostly cloudy. Kiev is 30 degrees and fair. Kabul is 40 and clear. Hong Kong is 57 and clear. Tokyo is 51 degrees and fair. Sydney, Australia is 67 and partly cloudy. San Francisco is 56 and sunny. And New York, New York is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Women's rights activists in Poland used red paint to symbolize blood as they protested against a government plan to register every pregnancy in a national database, and as Parliament prepares to debate a new proposal to further restrict abortion. The activists fear the database will allow Poland's right-wing authorities to track whether pregnancies end in a birth and create a possible tool for prosecutions. The health minister denied that recently, saying there is no pregnancy register and the government was just making a routine shift from paper to digital files. Poland last year restricted its already conservative abortion law, and abortions are now only allowed in cases of rape or incest, or if the woman's life or health is in danger. In practice, Polish women travel abroad for abortions in other European countries, including the Netherlands and Slovakia, and there are groups who assist them. Parliament is scheduled today to debate a proposal for a complete ban on abortion in Poland, including in cases of rape and danger to the woman's health. The Stop Abortion bill would define a fetus as a child under the law, and were it to become law, the activists who help women travel to abortion facilities and the women themselves could face years of imprisonment for murder. The penalty could be from 5 years to a life sentence.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. German investigators searched the offices of accountancy firm PricewaterhouseCoopers and the homes of current and former employees yesterday, Tuesday, in a probe of alleged tax evasion by tax advisors. The searches took place at offices in Frankfurt, Berlin, Dusseldorf, Hanover, and Stuttgart, and at the apartments of 4 current senior employees and 4 former senior employees. Prosecutors in Frankfurt said in a statement. The investigation centers on an alleged scheme used between 2012 and 2017 by the suspects, ages 50 to 67, to inaccurately declare revenue from tax advice to German clients as the proceeds of a Swiss partner company, they said. Prosecutors said that the scheme allowed them to evade taxes to the tune of more than $12.4 million U.S. over 5 years. They falsely declared proceeds stemmed from advising clients on declaring income from investments in Switzerland and payments of evaded taxes so that the clients could avoid prosecution, they added. PricewaterhouseCoopers confirmed the searches and said it was cooperating fully with authorities, German news agency dpa reported. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.